One reason why the Roman colony in Britain was so hard to maintain was that it was subject to continual depredations from the north and east. The Scots and the other Celtic races in northern Britain and Ireland were not reached by Roman civilization and were a constant terror to their enervated kinsmen in the south. And for at least a century before the Romans left, the eastern coast was familiar with the Saxon pirates from across the sea. After the final withdrawal of Roman protection, fruitless appeals were made for further aid. One famous message said, "To Etius, thrice consul, the groans of the Britons. The barbarians drive us to the sea. The sea drives us back to the barbarians. We are either slaughtered or drowned." In addition to these troubles, the Britons suffered from domestic disorders. Rome had left them only half civilized. The upper classes continued to speak Latin, and doubtless would have been glad to maintain the Roman system of civil and military discipline, but the old tribal feeling was too strong. And whatever manhood was left in the mass of the population wasted itself in petty tribal squabbles. Christianity had reached the island a century or two before the Romans left it, but after their departure it seems to have become more nominal than real, and life outside of the largest towns was vicious and violent. Two notable names stand out from the very obscure history of these times. Those of Patricius and Ambrosius Aurelianus. The former was a native of Scotland, but was kidnapped in his boyhood and sold as a slave in Ireland. After suffering many hardships, he was able to devote himself to the reformation of the country. He became a bishop of the Irish Church and has ever since been its patron saint. Ambrosius Aurelianus, on the other hand, or perhaps simply Ambrosius, is the probable original of the legendary King Arthur. His name survives in the name of Amesbury, Ambroseburg, a town often mentioned in Arthurian story. And the curious fortifications still extant on Salisbury Plain may well have been one of his strongholds, as the piratical invaders from the east penetrated farther into the heart of Britain. Ambrosius for a long time made a successful stand against them. He is the supposed hero of at least one real British victory, that at Mount Badon about the year 516. But the legendary Arthur, who overthrew the Saxons in 12 great battles and made a realm and reigned, is like a composite photograph, being credited with the deeds of many others besides Ambrosius, as well as countless deeds that were never done at all. The barbarian invaders from over the sea who first harried the coasts of Britain and finally conquered the island were known to the Britons as Saxons, but it would be more proper to call them English. They were in fact of 3 kindred tribes, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Soon after the Roman garrisons were withdrawn, these people began making permanent settlements on the British coasts. Gradually, they pressed inland, and by about 600 they had become possessed of the greater part of what is now England. They came from the southern part of the Danish peninsula and the adjacent coast stretching westward towards the Rhine. The Jutes, the least important of the 3 tribes, settled only Kent and few inland districts. The Saxons. The modern kingdom of Saxony has no connection with the ancient tribe. It was arbitrarily named at a much later date, and its inhabitants are not Saxons at all, in the strict sense. The Saxons took the rest of Britain south of the Thames, spreading as far to the west as they could, and the Anglais seized the eastern coast north of the Thames and gradually pushed inland all along the line. The Anglais were the most numerous and probably the most intellectual, and they, unlike the Saxons and Jutes, came as a whole nation, bringing their national life and leaving their old home desolate. Civilization and culture developed among them in northern England earlier and faster than among the Saxons or Jutes in the south, and both Saxons and Jutes began in very early times to speak of themselves too as English. These English were Germanic peoples, and their religion was akin to other Germanic religions. Early in the 7th century, they were Christianized by Roman missionaries, but the names of some of their original deities still survive in our names of days. Tuesday, Wednesday. Moreover, Christianity by no means reconciled them with their Celtic predecessors in Britain. Scotland, and for a long time the western part of England, remained independent and hostile. The fate of the British in the conquered parts of the island is not very definitely known. But certainly many were slain, and almost as certainly many others were retained as wives or as slaves. The English race therefore had from this time on a strain of Celtic blood. By the end of the 6th century, 7 distinct kingdoms, commonly known as the Heptarchy, were established in Britain. At that time, the kingdom of Kent was the most powerful of the Heptarchy, and its king exercised some sort of overlordship over most of the others. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the Anglian kingdoms of Northumberland and Mercia attained a similar position. And in the 8th and 9th centuries, in turn, the kingdom of the West Saxons came to the front. Thus, Jutes, Anglais, and Saxons enjoyed the supremacy in succession. There was for a long time no real political unity, but all were English, all spoke English, and all felt a strong unifying force in the church. For they had not one church of Wessex and another of Kent, but a single ecclesiastical organization for the whole Heptarchy. Therefore, after several generations of West Saxon overlordship, and especially after it became necessary to unite against common foes, the kings of Wessex naturally came to be in reality kings of England.